Let's move on to Edward Freeman's Stakeholder Theory, the last topic for today. I already talked about creating a stakeholder balance last week when we talked about ethical culture and leadership, and I will build on this. So if you have not watched my video on ethical culture and leadership, or simply cannot remember hearing it before, just go back and watch it again. Stakeholder theory argues that business can be understood as a set of relationships among groups which have a stake into the activities that make up the business. Business is about how customers, suppliers, employees, stockholders, communities, and others interact and create value. No stakeholder stands alone in the process of value creation. Let's face it, how can a shareholder recognize returns without management paying attention to the stakes of customers or employees? How can customers get their products and services without employees and suppliers? How can employees have a decent place to live without communities? So Edward Freeman argues that there is no conflict between serving all your stakeholders and providing returns for shareholders as well. In the long term, it is impossible to have one without the other. However, serving all these stakeholder groups requires discipline, vision, and committed leadership. In the real world, the stakes of each stakeholder group are multifaceted. They're complex and inherently connected to each other. Consequently, managers face multiple demands simultaneously, and they must figure out how to meet the demands of all stakeholders so that all win. Here we have a great example of what can happen if an organization focuses solely on profits. Lidl, a German supermarket chain similar to Walmart, wanted to reduce shoplifting and costs. That's a good approach to increase profits. So they hired private detectives who installed video cameras and gathered additional information about the employees. Stern, the German newspaper that uncovered the story, noted that the private detectives' reports included information on where employees had tattoos and information about employees' social circle. For example, her circle of friends consisted mainly of drug addicts, reads one record. Or Frau M wanted to make a call with her mobile phone at 14:05. She received the recorded message that she only had 85 cents left on her prepaid mobile. She managed to reach a friend with whom she would like to cook this evening, but on condition that her wage had been paid into her bank, because she would otherwise not have enough money to go shopping. I guess from Lidl's point of view, hanging out with drug addicts or being poor means that those employees are more likely to steal from them. What if I told you that in a Lidl store in the Czech Republic, employees were not allowed to use the restroom during working hours? I mean, makes sense. Why would an organization pay for its employees to do their private business, right? Luckily, there were some exceptions, as female workers who had their periods were allowed to go to the toilet now and then, but to enjoy this privilege, they were instructed to wear a visible headband. And I'm not making this up. While reducing shoplifting sounds like a good idea, does it justify gathering that much information about your employees and treating him that way? If you follow Milton Friedman's Stakeholder Theory, and honestly said, you're not a very smart person, you may come up with ideas like that. Because, well, it's an attempt to reduce costs. Luckily, any other approach only remotely considers stakeholders would think this is insane. The Lidl example was certainly extreme, and not many companies will go down that road. At least, I hope so. But let's get back to stakeholder theory. While stakeholder theory sounds great, just maximizing the value for all stakeholders, you are probably wondering, how can a manager maximize the value for all stakeholders? Well, I will try to answer that question in the next few minutes by going over a 4-step plan that I slightly adapted from a company called BSR, a global non-for-profit business network and consulting firm that is dedicated to sustainability. So, similar to Porter and Kramer, you first have to identify all stakeholders. However, instead of looking for an intersection, a stakeholder analysis requires that you analyze and prioritize stakeholders before you can come up with an action plan that maximizes the value for all stakeholders. Let's look at each step in more detail. Identifying stakeholders is a straightforward task, and we already talked about it before. You just have to think about who can affect or is affected by the achievement of the organization's objectives. This list will be different for each organization and will change for each organization over time as it and its environment evolves. To ensure that an organization does not forget any stakeholders, the initial list should not be limited by any constraints and should consider past, current, and future stakeholders. Most organizations will list shareholders, investors, direct and indirect consumers, current and potential employees, retirees, suppliers, competition, resident near the company, the environment, community, regulators, and so on. Again, it will be a very long list. But there might be some important stakeholders that are not as obvious. For example, some organizations rely on analysts and rating agencies, industry opinion leaders, the media, the Chamber of Commerce, schools, local policymakers, or NGOs. So you have to be creative and look beyond the obvious stakeholders here when you create the initial list. When creating this list, organizations need to consider a diverse set of potential stakeholders from new markets, new technologies, new customers, and impending regulations. In addition, they need to realize that the loudest voices or heaviest campaigners are not the only stakeholders. Once the list of all stakeholders is established, each stakeholder needs to be analyzed based on their contribution, influence, and legitimacy. To do that, managers should find answers to the following 2 questions. What does the stakeholder provide to the organization? And what opportunities and challenges are presented by our stakeholders? During this stage, it might be necessary to reach out to the stakeholders and get additional information or clarify the organization's understanding of the stakeholder. Once an organization has a detailed understanding of each stakeholder, it needs to prioritize their claims. As Porter and Kramer put it, corporations do not have the resources to solve all of the world's problems. So the organization has to go back and think of their own goals. What is it that the organization wants to achieve, and how does the organization want to achieve their goals? Yes, you're correct. I'm talking about the organization's mission, vision, and values. Stakeholders who provide the most expertise or value to the organization and its goals need to be ranked higher than those who do not contribute as much. At the same time, an organization also needs to consider which stakeholders depend the most on the organization. Finally, an organization has to create an action plan that addresses the issues of priority stakeholders, and in addition issues that are frequently expressed by all stakeholders, even if they're not priority stakeholders. To quote Edward Freeman, the primary responsibility of executives is to create as much value as possible for all stakeholders. Where stakeholder interests conflict, the executive must find a way to rethink the problems so that these interests can go together, so that even more value can be created for each party. If trade-offs have to be made because of a failure of imagination, time pressure, or other reason, then the obvious next step is to try to figure out how to improve the trade-offs for all sides. Managing for stakeholders is about creating as much value as possible for stakeholders without resorting to trade-offs. That means that for each of the primary stakeholder, an organization has to ask, am I maximizing the value for this stakeholder? If not, what can I do to maximize the stakeholder's value? Again, the idea behind this approach is that an organization does not think about how to maximize its profits first. That would be Milton Friedman's Stakeholder Theory or potentially Porter Kramer's strategic CSR approach. But the idea behind stakeholder theories, how can I be the best company for my employees, my customers, my suppliers, for the community, other stakeholders such as shareholders at the same time. By delivering value to all stakeholders, an organization can identify improvement opportunities along the whole value chain and consequently improve performance for shareholders too. There's a saying, when you only know physics, you don't know physics. That is because you need to know related topics such as math, chemistry, and so on too. Similar, when you only focus on profits, an organization will not be able to maximize its profits. To the contrary, they may come up with crazy ideas like Lidl. Only by focusing on all stakeholders can an organization also maximize its own profits. That is it for stakeholder theory. Now that you have learned about Milton Friedman's Stakeholder Theory, Carroll's Pyramid of CSR, Porter Kramer's Strategic CSR, and Edward Freeman's Stakeholder Theory, which approach do you think is the best in today's economy? As a future employee, do you care which approach your organization takes? Well, I am looking forward to discussing these questions with you soon. As always, please let me know if you have any questions. Goodbye for now and have a wonderful rest of the day.